Sydney and Joshua.
Oh, say hello, Sydney and Joshua.
Hi, Sydney and Joshua.
Oh, there's a power washer or something making noise today. There's always something making noise on an urban farm. In addition to the chickens and the watering can. Can you hear the watering can if you get close enough? Ooh, we just put some tail babies over here, so we're just watering them in a little bit. They're doing okay. Alright, we're going to go this way and get away from this noise. What they're doing. I think it's going to probably be noisy most of the time. We'll see how it goes. Alright, so Cora's going to start by checking the temperature for us so we can put it in our book. Hi Dan, thanks for joining us. Let's see what the temperature says. 80? 80, maybe a tiny bit lower than 80, but yep, about 80, maybe 79. And let's look up at the sky. What will we say about today? Definitely cloudy. All right, Cora, you come and record that in our book for us. And I'm going to tell everybody that I'm really glad it's cloudy. It's been really, really sunny and really, really hot here. And we could use a little bit of cloudiness, and we can use a little bit of a break from the heat. And we could really use some rain, which I know probably sounds funny because just a week or two ago I was saying we had too much rain, and now it feels like we have too little rain. But that's the way it goes around here. That's the way it goes when you're trying to work with nature, is sometimes you get what you want and you need, and sometimes you don't. So hello to Ezra, who's joining us. So today we are scheduled in our cycle. So this is our second cycle of 6 weeks of learning together since the virus quarantine started. And this is our second cycle of sessions. So second cycle of sessions, that's fun to say. So our cycle goes like this: seeds, worms, chickens, bees, water, and compost. So this week we're on the 4th week of our cycle. That's 4. And it's the week we're talking about bees. And I got really excited about talking about bees, and then I came outside today and I was looking around for some bees so that I'd be able to try to tell you what kind of bees we're seeing around here. And I realized there's no bees around. It's really weird. And if you were here with us the last time we talked about bees, it was Earth Day, and we talked about the idea of Silent Spring, which was a book written by Rachel Carson that talked about the idea of nature going silent because of human activity and because we were using pesticides and doing things to the environment that caused all of the bugs. So it's a little creepy out here right now because there's no bees around. So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that at this point we're not looking at a silent spring, but we are looking at a silent day in terms of bee watching because, oh, here's a little wasp, because bees do not like it when it rains. They don't like it when it's cloudy. So the good news for us, I'm going to just walk around where I can try to see something, so we can try to see a little bit of diversity today. Here's a marigold, and there's some kind of a wasp, a little tiny wasp, and I can tell, oh, it flew away. I can tell it's a wasp because it's not really very hairy. So we're going to look at a diagram and look at some more pictures from our Ohio Department of Natural Resources book about bees and wasps to tell a little bit more about the difference between bees and wasps today. But unfortunately, we're not going to see a ton of bees and wasps because hopefully it's going to rain today. So it turns out bees might be a better predictor of the weather than all our fancy weather apps. So I'm really hopeful. I'm crossing my fingers super tight and hoping that the fact that we're not seeing a lot of bees, which stinks for our lesson on bees, is a good sign that it's going to rain. So Ezra says he's been stung by a wasp in the neck. Ouch, that really hurts, Ezra. I'm so sorry to hear that. Especially because it turns out most bees and wasps don't sting unless they're in defense mode. So you have to move slowly and carefully around them. So let's see, I got some teaching materials out today. Let's see, we've got our book that I said. We're going to read this story later. I don't know how many of you know this story, but we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little while. Let's see. So here's our Common Bees and Wasps of Ohio field guide. And I might go ahead and contact the Ohio Division of Wildlife and see if I can get a few of these to have at the farm. And then if people who live around here want to come and pick one up, you can. But this book is just so great because it talks all about different kinds of bees and wasps. So we're going to talk for a minute, just look at this diagram about a bee's body. So a bee is a kind of insect. And one of the ways you can tell what an insect from other kinds of bugs is that insects have 6 legs. So let's count them. Make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 legs. Another thing that insects have is a body that has 3 parts. So bees have, let's see, a head. They have this middle part of their body that's called a thorax. And remember, we talked about how wasps don't have as much hair because they don't collect pollen in the same way as bees do. But this is a bee, and it's got a hairy, reddish-brown thorax, if it's a honeybee, sorry. And then it's got this big abdomen. And you guys have probably seen this before when you've seen a bee. And that's the part that sometimes, in a drawing, you'll see it as black and yellow striped. But it can be different depending on the type of bee. And that's one of the cool things you can learn in this field guide. And on the very, very end of its butt, that's where its stinger is. I think a lot of people think that a bee's stinger is on the front of its head, but it's not. It's on its tushy, on its tail. So if you do see a bee that has something sticking out, you can see the mouth on this bee a little bit. And we talked last month a little about long-tongued and short-tongued bees. So that's something you can look out for. The short-tongued bees are going to eat from sort of the top of the flower, and the long-tongued bees can stick their tongue down in further to get the nectar out, like a butterfly can with its proboscis. So one other thing is that most insects, and this honeybee is an example, have antennae. So that's another thing to look for, is see if when you look at a bee, you can see its antenna. And we are going to go back out there and try to go for a bee hunt and see if we can catch a bee and look at it really carefully, or at least I'll tell you about how you can try to do that when it's on a day that it's a little more favorable for finding bees outside. And Ezra, I bet you'll really like doing that, even though you might be afraid at first. Given your love of looking closely at earthworms, I think if you could get over your fear, you'd find it really fascinating to look close at the bees. And then the last thing that is a good indicator that you're looking at an insect is that most insects have wings. And so honeybees have one set of wings. You can see they have one set, they have a wing on this side of their body, and then in this drawing you can see they have a wing on their other side of their body. Some bees and wasps have 2 sets of wings. So that's another way of knowing of figuring out and identifying what species of bee you're looking at. So this picture also has these dark big eyes. And that's a whole other thing we could talk about. when we go bee hunting, we're going to try to see if we can find bees with these pollen baskets or pockets on their legs. And sometimes they'll also have them underneath their abdomen. And that's where they carry pollen. And if you've never seen a bee actually carrying pollen around, but you know they collect pollen, it's a really cool thing to see in person. So I highly recommend you find some place to see that. So bees collect pollen, and that you can see that yellow stuff on their hairy legs and on their hairy bellies. And then the other thing that they do is they can drink nectar out of flowers through their tongues, through their long tongues, and they store it in a special internal organ that they have called a crop. And so if you're interested in seeing the inside of a bee, I just brought a drawing today that shows you the outside of a bee. But there are other pictures you can definitely find on the internet that'll show you the inside of a bee. So let's look real quick, since we were just talking about that pollen. I might have shown you guys this picture before, but I just think it's so cool. Sorry, getting my things organized. I just think it's so neat that it's worth looking at again. So where is it? It's at the end of this book. You guys see this bee that is covered in pollen? Can you see it all over its legs? Looks like it's made of gold. It's so beautiful. So that's really cool. So bees, before we go on our hunt, let's talk really quick about bees. Why are bees important? Does anybody want to tell me something real quick? If you can type fast enough, or have mom and dad type for you. Why do we need bees? I know we already heard from one friend who's a little skeptical about bees and wasps because they can sting, although it's unusual. So why should we care about bees? Why do we need to keep them around? I'm going to try to remember that song Joni sang for us when she was here on Earth Day, and maybe it'll jog your memory. Let's see. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun, taking pollen on their knees. For every third bite you eat, thank the bees. So yes, Ezra, they help in the garden, right? So they help in the garden by pollinating flowers to help make fruits. Let's see, Bernadette is a beekeeper, I know that, so I'm going to just see what she has to say. Let's see, honeybees have 2 sets of wings. Oh, so this is a very not good illustration I found, thank you. 2 sets of wings, and they can hook them together for flying and unfold them to fold them so they can fit into smaller spaces. Oh, so they can unfold them or fold them so they can fit into different size spaces. That's really cool. I have not seen any honeybees out today. I saw 2 bumblebees, and I've seen some smaller bees and a couple of wasps so far today, but I have not seen anything else. So, okay, so Christy and her kids are also saying pollination. So, okay, so we've got pollination. I have 3 reasons I want to talk to you about today. So, can you think of another great thing that bees and wasps can do? And I'm going to tell you, they're like, we say 2 sides of the same coin. And they're not the first thing you think about when you think about bees. So the first one is that bees can be prey for some, bees can be prey, so they can be eaten by birds and lizards and praying mantises. We had a huge praying mantis here a few years ago, and we got to watch it eating bees, which was pretty cool. It was a little bit sad because it was eating all honeybees, I think, and taking away from the honeybee population, but it was pretty cool. I'm distracted because I see a bumblebee flying around, so maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get to go see it close up. So they're prey, and what's the opposite of prey? If you're not the one being eaten, you're the one doing the eating. So bees and wasps can also be predators. So they can help. There's a really cool wasp, maybe later in the summer we'll get to see it, that lays its eggs in the caterpillar of a kind of, I'm trying to get this while I'm talking to you. the caterpillar of the tomato hornworm. And it's really, really neat because it lays its eggs, and you can actually see the eggs popping out of the body of this giant caterpillar. It's a big fat caterpillar. And eventually, if you leave them and don't take them away, because they can be very damaging to your tomato plants, but if you want to watch them, you can actually see when the wasp larvae emerge, the tops of these little eggs get cut off, and it's super, super cool. So let's see if we can get up close and watch a bee for a minute before we read our stories. So I'm gonna, while we do this, I guess I'll go around the garden and I'll look for some plants, and I'll show you some things that bees tend to like. So this is actually a volunteer. This is not something that I planted. I believe this is Ragwort. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a Ragwort plant. And you can see that it was blooming and it's already making seeds. So just like if you've ever seen a dandelion make its little seeds, these are seeds that have wings. Those little white parts help the seeds fly through the air to plant more plants. So there's a wasp. Can you see it? So bees or wasps really like yellow plants, and they like purple plants and blue plants. So that's a yellow plant that we got to see them on. This is a kind of marigold called calendula, and bees are supposed to like that too, but I haven't seen any bees on our calendula yet. We'll see. I don't know. And Bernadette, maybe you know. Ooh, here's a bumblebee hanging upside down. Not exactly sure what it's eating because, oh, it's grooming itself. Can you see? It's just like, it was just doing its hairdo. Ooh. Let's see. I don't want to make it angry. Oh, yeah, it's like fixing itself up. Can you see that? I don't have any fancy camera equipment like National Geographic, but it just seems like it's going around and hanging out and then cleaning itself off. That's really cool. What happened to you, Mr. Bee? All right, let's see, what else? These are called straw flowers. I actually grew these from seeds that Bernadette gave to me. And they're really neat. Can you hear the sound? It's dry, like straw. It's a dry sound. And I don't see a bee, but I do see an ant. Can you guys see that? And an ant's another kind of insect. Let's see, what other flowers? I've been seeing a lot of bees on our comfrey plants. Let's see if we can go find some comfrey. And maybe we'll see some, let's see, oh, and the borage. The bees really like to drink nectar from the borage. But like I said, the sun did come out, so that's lucky for us. But here's a teeny tiny something. I'm not sure if that's a bee or not. And there it goes. Borage. You still okay, so we got heated out of being outside, and then the internet stopped working. I did discover some cable guys were working, so maybe that was the problem there. But anyway, the story for today is The Curious Garden. And the reason I picked this story is because Cora and I have been walking around in the neighborhood, and we've seen a lot of volunteers, including a crazy little tomato volunteer growing up between the street and the sidewalk the other day. And the tomato, along with others, mostly others, are great food for the bees, and something that we can thank the bees for helping us pollinate. So this is The Curious Garden by Peter Brown, one of my favorite author illustrators. And you can see the front end pages start with a gray rocky terrain with just a tiny little peak of a garden in the corner. And this is a book where the end pages in the back don't match the end pages in the front, but you'll have to wait to see what those look like. Curious Garden by Peter Brown. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. Now look around if you see this train track. It's going to play an important role in this story. But right now, see all this black smog and gray, dreary, blah. However, there was one little boy who loved to be outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing around through the neighborhood. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old train tracks, as he did from time to time when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. So the tracks would be on top of this railway. The railway had stopped working ages ago. And since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for a curious boy to do. He must go through this door and up the stairs and come out of that little house. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last things he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew what he could do to help. So he returned to the railway the very next day, and he got to work. He watered with a big bucket of water and almost drowned the plants. And he had a few pruning problems. He was trying to trim these branches and one just completely fell off. But the plants waited patiently while Liam found better ways of gardening, like singing to his plants. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. It started here, and it started to creep. A little more, a little more. You can see as the season goes by, it's getting bigger, and it's spreading bigger and bigger. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. And those plants started to attract ladybugs and birds and butterflies. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. And we saw in the beginning how far it went. They went in that direction, they went in that direction. The flowers and the clouds touched each other. The garden touched the sky. After spending his summer and spring and autumn in the garden, Liam's time on the railway finally was interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit his plants. You can see he's kind of sad. But rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. And after 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken its toll. But thanks to Liam's planning and his handy new tools and a little help from the sun, he's got a nice watering can and some good new pruning shears and gloves, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. La la la. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and it was finally ready to make a move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther away from the railway and were followed by more delicate plants. Look at that, it's just climbing down, down, down. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. Like this car, look, it has no tires, it's up on cinder blocks. But it's getting filled with a garden where the engine used to be. And here the cracks in the sidewalk. Plants will grow anywhere. This is what I saw that made me think of this story. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. No one's gonna stop if they can't see that stop sign. And the firemen won't be able to get the water out of this hydrant. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. Good morning, sir. Who do you think that gardener is? Dumping out a wheelbarrow full of garden. But the most surprising thing that popped up were the new gardeners. Look at this on the rooftops of all the buildings. There's people growing things. Sunflowers. I love this whole view of sunflowers. There's the curious garden on the railway. Look at this silly guy up here on the top of that apartment building mowing the lawn. And he's waving to this other person who's mowing the lawn. And on the top of this building, there's corn growing and a scarecrow. So silly. There's garden everywhere on the steps. In an old parking lot. You can see where the parking spaces were and the parking meters. This book has great illustrations. You should get it out of the library and look at it some more yourself. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardeners, Liam's favorite, all of the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. And here you can see Liam and his family. His son, who looks just like he did one day. And this is that first little bush that he learned how to prune on. And here's the rest of his family. And here's the beautiful city. It looks a lot different. Not dreary at all. Those beautiful rooftop gardens. And this is the end. These final end pages. So thanks for being with us today, and sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll see you again soon. Bye.